Um, you're learning Pashas Voeira, and this Parsha is the major piece of the Makis that took place in Parah Mitzrayim is in this Parsha. And the Parsha starts, as you learned, that Hashem says to Moshe that I indeed appeared and was in contact with Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, the fathers of this nation. But I have not really gone all the way. I did not what's called substantiate it. I didn't prove myself true because I did not carry out that which I promised to them. And now is the time that I have to carry it out. And this principle that Hashem says I have to carry out that which I promised is expressed in the Torah. Hashem expresses it by saying, Ani Hashem. In other words, that as a result of this, that's going to take place, as a result of the fact that I'm going to carry out what I promised, it's not just everybody has to carry out what they promise. This is an imperative, a requirement. But here will be something special, that it will be established and will be recognized, will be known to the Yidden, this Inyan that Ani Hashem. You learned in the beginning of Rashi, this is the principle. Hashem is the creator of the whole world. What's not known about Hashem that becomes known through this process of Yetzias Mitzrayim, that's something unique. You learned in Rashi says, the Pasuk says, Shmi Hashem lo neidaiti lohem. And my name Hashem, lo neidaiti lohem. So Rashi says, lo neidaiti, everybody knows what that means. I wasn't known to them. Rashi says, it does not mean that they did not know that my name is Hashem. Because Hashem's name is mentioned many times with Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov. Havaya. What then does it mean, lo neidaiti? Lo neidaiti means that even though they knew that this is my name, but they did not really experience it. They did not really see it being part of their life, part of their reality. And lo neidaiti, neidaiti means I was known. And thus, now begins the time that as a result of this process, this name, Ani Hashem, will become known to them personally. Not just know from a distance that Hashem is Hashem, but they will have a personal knowledge, a personal experience of Hashem's presence with them. What is to follow? What is that this Parsha begins? Effectively, it begins the process of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Now, there are many aspects associated with Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Gemara says that Mitzrayim was a land that was ruled very, very strongly, and no one could ever possibly escape from Mitzrayim. And the fact that the whole nation was able to leave Mitzrayim was a show of tremendous force from Hashem, a breakthrough of Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim worshipped the Nilus, they were idol worshippers, and Hashem countered and broke their beliefs. Many things that were associated. But the real difficult, so to speak, the real special aspect that took place at that time was not all of these things. We know, and of course Hashem can do anything. Hashem created the world, and He is in control of everything that happens, and He can change everything, anything in the world. As a matter of fact, how did Hashem take Eden out of Mitzrayim? He killed their Bechorim, He killed their firstborn, later on in the next Pasha, and the Mitzrayim got all scared up, and they said to Eden, go out. Now Hashem could have, as Moshe Rabbeinu says, during one of the plagues, He says, I could have destroyed you all and taken Eden out of Mitzrayim. So the taking Eden out of Mitzrayim and freeing, so to speak, of slaves, that is not the great feat that took place there. Everybody understand these words? Feat. Accomplishment. The special and the great feat that took place here is thank you. Is something that has to do specifically with the Jewish people and the distinction between the Eden and the Mitzrayim. Moshe Rabbeinu, much later, all the way to the end, when Moshe Rabbeinu recounts to the Eden what they had experienced in these 40 years. So Moshe Rabbeinu mentions not all the plagues and all the things. He mentions that also, but primarily is that the Yidden were a nation taken out from inside another nation. The fact was at that time, as we know from the Gemara and we know from Midrashim and we know from Chassidus, that Yidden were completely assimilated with the Mitzrayim. And assimilated to the point where Eden, there was not an obvious distinction between the Yid and the Goy. They had sunk to the Egyptian culture. Later on, when Eden were crossing the Yam Suf, and the Egyptians were drowning, so the Medrash says that there were Lamaila, Malachim, who came to Hashem and said, what's going on over here? This group, both of these groups are Oiv de Avodah Zorah. How come this group goes through safely, and this group is drowning? But what was accomplished, and the great feat and point, in this whole process was to establish the distinction between Eden and Goyim, and to establish it to the point in a manner that will be recognized and will be experienced by the Eden themselves. Primarily that Eden should recognize that they are selected out, that they are different, that they are a separate nation. By the plagues, which you started learning already, the plagues, the makis, there were 10 makis in all. In this parsha this week was the first 7 makis. And the makis were miracles, obviously. As a matter of fact, even though they were miracles, as you learn, the first 3 makis, not the first 3, the first 2, the stick, which was a sign, and then the first 2 makis, Dom Tzfardeya, the Egyptian sorcerers were able to duplicate. They were able to do it. So if they were able to do it, so what's the point? What was the point of that makir? They went and they did the same thing. The primary point of the makis was not just the miracle. The primary point of the makis was to establish the distinction, the separation between Eden and Goyim, and the Mitzrayim. You sure you have a question?
Mm-hmm. You said it says in the parsha that there's there are Egyptians that can replicate the plagues. Or the first plague is Hashem turns the water into blood. I don't see how they accomplish that they can make blood when any water that they touch will turn into blood anyways. It's not like they're accomplishing it. Because if an Egyptian touches it...
You have a good question, but if you look in the Chumash, it says that they did it. Now you have a good question. How did they do it? Where did they get water to do it? That was your question?
Yeah.
Okay, in the course of my talk, and that question will also be answered. Okay? So if they are able to replicate the same thing, so what was the point? The point was not so much the miracle. The point was that there was blood. All the waters turned blood. But the waters in the hands of the Yidden did not turn blood. It was water. And this is where they got water to transform to blood. The same thing was with the Tzfardeya, the frogs that were a terrible annoyance, but the main point there also was that the Tzfardim went all over, but they avoided completely any Jewish home. And what is the difference? This continued on throughout all the Makkahs, and a point is made every time that it didn't touch the Jewish community. Every time, all the way to the last Makkah for next week, the Makkah from the Bechoides, Makkah's Bechoides, where the Bechoidim died. There, it says clearly that Hashem will skip over the Jewish house. Hashem will skip over the Jewish home. The Makos, in other words, served a dual purpose. They served a purpose to convince Paroi to let Eden go, and also not only to convince him, but as a matter of fact to punish him for all the evil that he did to the Eden. So that he will know that, I'll come back to that, to punish him for all the evil that he did. But at the same time, it was also a directed at the Eden themselves. That they too, Eden should also recognize and learn something from this. The process of the makis, every time there were 3 sets. There were a total of 10 makis, and these 10 makis were divided into 3 sets. And we say in the Haggadah, the tzach, hadash, be'achav. The first 3, the second 3, and the latter 4. 3 sets of makis. Before each set, Moshe Rabbeinu came to Paroi, and he told him that I'm going to bring makis, and the result, and as a result of this makis, you will learn something additional, something more about Hashem. Because Paroi originally said, Lo yadaitis Hashem, I know nothing about Hashem. So the makis were intended to tell Paroi clearly about Hashem. And to tell Paroi clearly about Hashem, to tell him, number 1, he should know that there is Hashem, Kani Hashem. That's the first set. The second set was that Ani Hashem B'Kerev Ha'oretz, that I can function, that I did not abandon the world, and I'm still here involved in the world. And the third and last set of makis was that I can change anything in the world. Ein kol mini b'chol ha'oretz. That I have full power to change anything. So this was to teach Paroi about Hashem, and also to make sure that Paroi recognizes that all these plagues are coming upon him directly from Hashem, in conjunction and in relation to the Jewish people. But this was not the end of it. This was not the only reason, the only purpose of the makis. And perhaps even a more important purpose was to get the Yidden to recognize their relationship with Hashem. So that Eden will experience this special distinction. In Sikha, the Rebbe points out that we have to know that since that the world was created, the world was created, for the sake of Eden and for the sake of Torah. In other words, this is the core, this is the very essence of the world. Why it was created in the first place? It is for the sake of Torah and in Eden. Therefore, everything that occurs in the world, even that which appears to be primarily directed at Mitzrayim, at Babel, at Ashur, whatever it is, has truly, in fact, its primary goal, its primary purpose is how it affects the Yid. Nothing can happen in the world that has no direct effect and direct teaching to the Yid. What is, and this, as we pointed out, is introduced in the Torah as saying that thereby, this is how Ani Hashem, that my Hashem's name, Hashem, will be known and will be experienced and recognized by Yid. The purpose and the reason for all that, we know that the whole experience, the whole episode of Mitzrayim, of even being subjugated in slavery and being degraded to that low level where they completely were indistinguishable from the Mitzrayim, and then taken out, scooped out, so to speak. The whole purpose of that was in order to make possible Matan Torah. In order to make possible Matan Torah. Matan Torah, which we will speak about Torah later on, but in context of what we're discussing now, one of the principles that occurred in Matan Torah is that clearly and forever the Jewish people were set aside from all other nations. They received the Torah, and this is what's called Torah Semes, Torah's Havaya, Torah's Hashem. So you would think, if this is the truth, and this is Hashem's Torah, the creator of the world says this is how you should behave, then therefore it applies to everyone in the world. If this is the truth, how can the truth be discriminant? If it's my truth, it's somebody else's truth. And this is what Hashem is telling us, and this is what occurred in Matan Torah. There are different levels of truth. There is what's called truth of the world, and then there is the godly truth. In the world, Hashem, when Hashem created the world, He immediately instructed Adam Arish, all the way in the beginning, the first man, and He instructed him certain rules of behavior which are applicable universally to all peoples of the world. All of these rules of behavior that were given, instructed to Adam, these are rules that effectively give guidance how one is to behave in the world in a manner that the world will be a civil and a peaceful world. That's one level of truth. And then there is a completely different level of truth that is called Emes Havaya, Emes of Havaya, not Elohim, the creator of the world, but Havaya. Havaya, this is Eloku's godliness that is above world. And the real purpose of creation of the world was so that Havaya, Emes Havaya, should be known. Not that there should be a world that behaves nicely. The purpose of creation of the world was that Ashmi Havaya should be known in the world. From the perspective of Havaya, Havaya can only be known and can only be accepted and related to the Jewish people. This is what was given in the Torah. The Torah, as I said before, the Torah is Torah Semes, the Torah of truth, Hashem's Torah. And yet, We know that the Torah belongs exclusively to the Jewish people, even to the extent that a non-Jew is not even allowed to perform the mitzvahs. Not only is he not obligated, but he's not allowed. A goy is not allowed to keep Shabbos. He's not allowed to learn Torah. And the reason for that is that in order to receive the Torah and to relate to this principle of emes havaya, to havaya which is higher than the world, there has to be a sense, a completely different perspective than that which is understood in the world. And I'll explain what I mean. Like I mentioned before, that the great thing that was exhibited and was established at Yetzias Mitzrayim was not so much that slaves were freed and Hashem was able to do miracles. It was primarily the union of distinction between the Yidden and the Goy. As a result of that distinction, as a result of the fact that the Yidden were enslaved in Mitzrayim and then taken out as a people, the existence of the Jewish people as a people was defined very differently than the people of all other peoples in the world. I think, if I remember correctly, I mentioned it sometime in the past over here. All peoples in the world, like the Mitzrayim themselves, the Egyptians, how did the nation Mitzrayim come to be? There was a man called Mitzrayim. Chom had a son called Mitzrayim. This man went and chose to settle himself in this area. And then he had offspring, he had kids, and his kid had kids, and that became the nation of Mitzrayim. In other words, this was what's called a natural development, a world development. The kids had kids and became a nation. And this is true regarding all nations of the world, except for the Jewish people. The Jewish nation, although they too are descendants of one man, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yankee, descendants, they have this connection. But that is not what made them into a nation. Because when Yankee came to Mitzrayim, and there was a beginning of a nation, there were 70 people, beginning of a nation. What happened later on? That nation was completely assimilated and absorbed in Mitzrayim. As a nation, nationally, they lost their identity. Who recreated them as a nation? It was not a natural growth. If we were left up to the natural process, they would have been lost. Who recreated them as a nation? Who established and declared them as a nation? Hashem's interference. Hashem came and declared them as a nation. In other words, they created a nation directly by Hashem's effect, by Hashem's act. It was not a natural process that created this nation. As a matter of fact, This is actually the reason. Since the Jewish people as a nation are not really ancestral, in other words, just a natural outgrowth, but it is by declaration what Hashem declares who is a Jew. And that's why it's possible to have Gerim, because Hashem declares a Jew is one who came out of Mitzrayim, who had the ancestry of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and a Jew is also one who joins, who accepts Torah mitzvahs, and who wants to be Nisgayer. In other words, the Jewish nation is not a natural process. It was not created from a natural process. It was created by direct act from the Meivashem. Because that the Jewish nation was created in this manner, in other words, as a nation, they directly attest. Attest means that they represent Hashem's Hashem's presence. Because their whole existence as a nation is not a natural phenomenon. It is a godly creation. This is why they are capable of receiving Hashem's Torah and carrying and having this represent the Shem Havaya. Because their whole existence is not a natural existence as a nation. Their whole existence is by declaration of Hashem's distinguishing, saying, this is my nation. This is what happened at Matan Torah. And this started in this parsha by the Makkis. The first point where Hashem showed the distinction between a Yid and a Goy to such an extent, while the Yidden were still mixed into that nation. They didn't even know what's going on. It was entirely Hashem, so it's what we call in Chassidus the Atzmus. This is not for now to go into these detailed levels. I was able to identify Eden from their essence, even though functionally they were equal, they were the same. Intellectually and emotionally, they were indistinguishable.
This is an awakening for the Jews, or is for the Mitzrim to notice?
Sorry?
It's an awakening for each Jew.
For the Jew, primarily for the Jew. That's what I'm pointing out. Primarily to the Jew. This is what prepared Yidden. Started their march, so to speak. Started their move and their development in the direction of recognizing their special place and their special relationship with Hashem. Therefore, this explains what it says here, that Shmi Havaya lo nedaita lahem. Havaya, as we said before, Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov also knew that Hashem's name is Havaya. But Havaya is higher than the world. And therefore the union of Havaya in the world was not known. What do we see in the world? Shem Elokim. Shem Elokim we saw in the world. Where do we see? We see it many times. We saw that in the days of Noach, when the people strayed and perverted the world, Hashem came and he cleaned up the world. Hashem wouldn't let the world go to pot, and be destroyed by human perversions. Later on, when there was the Hafloga, when after the Mabul, when people decided they're going to get together and they're going to create an eternal monument that will keep them together and will keep Hashem out of their lives. They'll take care of themselves. Again, Hashem came and he disrupted this activity. Then there was Sdoim, a sinful nation. That what was their sin? They were evil people amongst themselves. It wasn't just Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah was rampant. It was just that they perverted their way. They were vicious and completely rejectional of anyone but their own. And Hashem said, this is not acceptable. This is not normal way in the world. You have your place, fine, but you can't be vicious to other people. This is not normal. This is not acceptable, so to speak, from a worldly perspective. Hashem came and he destroyed it. So the union of Elikim, the master of the world, this was known in the world all the time. But Havaya, this is something different. This is not just ruling the world and the world run in the proper path. Havaya is that which defines a path in life. This is what Hashem gave us, the Jewish people. A path in life in this world that, as a matter of fact, is not definable and not understandable from a worldly perspective. We can only understand it from a godly perspective. There is no way that, for instance, from a worldly perspective, we can understand what does it mean you put on tefillin. What kind of act is this, putting on tefillin? There's no way to understand it from a worldly perspective. Nothing happened. They wrap the strap, and it's a mitzvah. Or you have strings on your tzitzis. Even the truth is, every mitzvah, even Shabbos, even though Shabbos, the world accepted that it should be a day of rest, but not Shabbos the way we do Shabbos. It's not explainable from a worldly perspective. In other words, what was needed here, and what this Makis, started this process to identify this nation, the Jewish nation, and to identify them as a nation, even though they're a nation amongst other nations, a physical nation, but they are different. They're not part of the physical world. Because we see that they were distinguished from another nation so that from a physical perspective they looked exactly the same. They were identified and pronounced, so to speak, by Hashem. This is, and as a result of that, this is what made it possible that Shem Havaya should become known and revealed in the world. And because later on, when Eden came out of Mitzrayim, and they were carried on to the Yam Suf, and then they came to Matan Torah. So that, as a result of this, of the Makis, what even were distinguished, as a result of the whole process of Yetzias Mitzrayim and Matan Torah, there is this nation in the world, and this is the Jewish nation, that defines its presence on the basis of the fact of this is what Hashem wanted. Not just its actions, what it does, but its very existence, its very presence. Who are you? What makes you be what you are? What kind of nation are you? That very presence of a nation is something which is by Hashem's declaration, Hashem's creation. And thus, this reconnects back and fulfills the ultimate purpose of the entire creation. That Bereshis, as we said, the Bereshis is Beis Reshis, that the whole world was created not for the sake of the world, that there should be a big civil world. The world the purpose is that there should be Yidden and Torah, because the union of the world is that the world should actually, that Hashem, Havaya, should be recognized in the world. And that, and the Tzias Mitzrayim and Matan Torah, this is what made it possible and ultimately facilitated and leading up to, as we're talking about all the time, to the Geula Shleima to Mashiach. For our purposes, this is just explaining the Inyan as it is in the Pasha and the whole Inyan of the Marcus and so forth. But for our purposes, it is important to reflect and to understand each individually. We live in a big world. Baruch Hashem, we're here in Yeshiva, we're sitting and learning. So here, sort of, we're at like an Eretz Goshen, we are kind of isolated. But we all know that we are part of the big world. And invariably, information comes in and questions we have. Why can't, how do you relate to all the things that are going on in the world? And how do you carry through your life as a Yid in the big world? This is one of the great, what's called great nisyonos, the great tests and great challenges that every person has. Regardless, one can be really a good, fine yeshiva bar. When he goes out and he has to be involved in the world, he has to work, he has to have parnosa, he works side by side with the goy. And he competes, so to speak, on the same premises and the same principles. How does one carry through? Even the simplest, most obvious question. Where a Yid is not allowed to work on Shabbos. And he is competing with a Goy who can work on Shabbos. So it's an unfair competition. So in our day, today, Baruch Hashem, at least in our vicinity, in New York, in our area, this has been, so to speak, broken through. It's very common, there are many people who do this, and we don't feel so much the challenge of it. But this extends itself to other things. Whatever you do, wherever you go, there is always this difference. This I can eat, this I cannot eat. I can go in here, I cannot go in here. Wherever you go, there is always this restriction. And as we know, the Yetzer Hara is a very, very smart cookie. And he comes to a person with from all kinds of directions. no one is immune. No one is assured that that the Yetzer Hara is not going to play a role in his life. There's no such thing. There's no guarantee. We have to, and both. On the one hand, we have to just stand steadfast, but on the other hand, that sometimes is not enough. We have to have a feel and understand what it is that distinguishes us. We have to understand why is it. And the Goy comes and says, I don't mean necessarily the Goy, I mean anybody, it could be Chas v'Sholom Ayid who is not Shem. Why are you different? The Goy comes to a Yid and he says, why, my food is not clean enough? It's not hygienic enough? It's not healthy? What's wrong with my food? Aren't you insulting me that you don't eat my food? You think this is hypothetical case? This is far-fetched? It's not far-fetched. It's not far-fetched. Something that we all faced with. And we have to have a sense, not just say, okay, this is what I was told not to do, and that's not enough. You have to have a perspective. You have to stand there with self-respect and know what you're doing. And understand what it is that keeps you going like this. And gives you the strength to face it down. And the principle in this is that we indeed live in a different world than the Goyim do. They live in a natural world, and we live in God's world. Even though the two meet at a certain point, we have to do certain things naturally. But we don't belong there. We do things naturally, but that's not where we live. And our way of our defining path, right from wrong, good from bad, is all based on a completely different set of parameters. Because we did not come to be in a natural manner, a natural process, in the way any other nation was created. We came to be as a nation by God's hand and God's statement. And that is what we are acting on. When we come to eat, we don't eat because it's natural to eat. We eat because Hashem said we should eat. And therefore we eat that which Hashem said we should eat. And that which Hashem said we should not eat, we have no shaykhs to it. We have no connection to it. This way, with Hashem's help, we will successfully go through all the golis and this less golis, and ultimately we will be successful to accomplish this task that Hashem said, that will be Ushmi Hashem Noidaiti Lahem, that Hashem's name will become known to the whole world through us, through our steadfast holding on and recognizing this is that Hashem's presence is what identifies our being, which is in effect, this is the meaning of Mashiach. That there is not a world and we are just, so to speak, maneuvering around the world, but there is a world that belongs to Hashem. And we, the Jewish people, represent that part of the world. And that part of the world is the real world. That is the part which gives life and sustenance to the rest of the world, because that is the core purpose for which it was created. Hashem should help each one. This is something which we have to have, so to speak, individually and together. We have to strengthen each other, we have to strengthen ourselves. Every individual person, every Eid has to know who he is. And it is very possible how things are happening. We know that there are Babish Yidin, a Yid, one in a town, one in a hick town, and he doesn't get lost. Because he knows who he is. A Yid has to first know clearly and strongly what he stands for, who he is. So that none of the challenges of the world, they're challenges, it's difficult, but he will know, nevertheless, it doesn't belong to him. He'll know how to distinguish and explain to himself why that doesn't belong to him. This is not his world. That world doesn't exist for him. That way, with Hashem's help, we will speedily, successfully bring about the Geulah Shlema, and we'll all rejoice at Mashiach. Yes, sir.
Never really understood
Go ahead.
since the Levi.
What?
Since the Levi.
The Levi?
Yeah. Whole period of being Mitzrayim were actually totally from slavery.
Right.
So I didn't understood if we did have a class of intellectual leaders. Come they were not able to
All the other people?
What's the question, Rabbi? I'm sorry to interrupt.
I understand the question as being that why the Leviim were not able to keep all the other people?
Yeah.
Why? We have it today. We have little groups that learn Torah, and there's huge numbers of Yidden who don't listen to them. Huge. Even today, that everything is turning around, still there are huge numbers of people that don't want to listen. We go out to them, we try to teach them, and some of them, Baruch Hashem, do respond, and many of them don't even want to listen. Has it ever happened that you ask, are you Jewish? Leave me alone. Has it ever happened? Of course it happened.
Why different?
It's true.
Why different? Speaking about a certain percentage or the God's island seats.
In Mitzrayim, they were under the rulership of the king of Mitzrayim, and it was a gimmick that got them in and enslaved them, and then they couldn't get out of it. They slowly got sunken. The Levim didn't have the power to stand up to that.
Leadership always